Greetings everyone, welcome to my not so humble presentation on the 3D Motion Show. My name is Athanasios Pozantzis and today I will show you a technique to allow you to make art directable plant growth. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did preparing it, so let's get on with the show. Let's begin in an empty project. And first of all, let's model a leaf, a procedural leaf. So I'm going to go to my top view and I'm going to use my spline pen and I'm going to go and draw a leaf. I want the base to be here. So I'm going to start from the top, going to drag here, one more here, and just a click over there. I'll press escape to accept this. So go to my move tool. I'm going to zoom in and move it around so I can get the desired shape. Fantastic. Let me just put this -10 so the numbers are nice and round, and go up here. I'm going to set this to 0 so it's right on the Z axis. The way I'm going to model this is so that I can go and do any change at any given moment without any reservations. So let's go back to our perspective view and let's change to the model tool. How do I take this and make it into an actual leaf? So I'm going to use an interesting technique. I'm going to get an instance while the spline is selected. So now I have a copy of that spline in the form of an instance. And I'm going to go and get my rotation tool and I'm going to flip it over 180 degrees. So now I have two splines. And how do we make a surface from two splines? We're going to go and use a loft. Drag these two in here, and there you have it. Let me turn on my display. You can see we have nice quads, well, except for these, which are triangles. But if you want everything to be quads, go here, go to points mode, and now we have that point available for us. And anything we do on this spline will reflect on the other one. The other great thing about this technique is that the topology of the leaf is controlled solely from the loft object. So I can change the subdivisions just to make it look smoother, and I can even change these intermediate ones. So depending on what you're trying to do, you can go at any given moment and change things around. So let's call this leaf flat. What I want to do now is start deforming this leaf, and the way I'm going to do it is get a null, and I'm going to call this leaf def for deformed. I'm going to make this a child, and I'm going to use a bend deformer. Now what I like to do is just put a slight bend, and first I want to make my bend deformer conform to a flat surface. Now you can see that this is the X axis. I want this to be flat. Go here to the first and you can see, there you go. Fantastic. Now what I'm going to do is rotate it, because what I'm going to do with the leaf is bend it side to side. So let's go down to the bend, make sure that the point is not selected, because otherwise you don't get a reading over here. And I'm going to go to the coordinates and I'm going to set my rotation to 90. Fantastic. And now you can see the green axis is the Y. So if I go to the object and make this smaller, that's what becomes smaller, the Y. I'm going to set this to 100 and I'm going to offset my deformer to the right over here. So I'm going to set it half of what I set this. So I'm going to set it to 50. And the reason I'm doing this is when I make it a sibling of the leaf, and because it's right there in the middle, I can go and activate the unlimited mode. And this will provide us with a deformation on both sides of our model. Fantastic. I want to keep length to minimize the distortion, although it doesn't make a huge difference, and just move it here for good measure so I can see it better on my leaf. You can adjust this value and make it bend any way you want. Excellent. Now let me hide this because I don't like too many things in my viewport. I have the first deformation of my leaf. Now the second deformation I want to do is I want to make the leaf curl, because when a leaf grows from a plant, I don't know, I've seen too many documentaries with David Attenborough, and it does tend to spiral around. Even if it doesn't, that's what I want to do now, so don't judge me. Now, how am I going to do that? You'll be inclined to draw some sort of spiral spline, or go and get a helix. You can flatten it. You can say, I want the inner to be smaller. So this is a sort of spiral, but this won't allow us to unfold the spiral, because I want to use this to deform the leaf so it spirals in and so forth. Anyway, we're not going to use a helix. We are going to use the magical, the one and only Noseman. And first of all, I want it to be pretty much close to the length of the leaf. So go to the simple, and you can see I'm using the simple mode. So go to the simple tab and just extend this and just eyeball it so it's this long. We can change this at any given moment, and we will change it to do various things. Now, let me close everything here. In the simple tab, you will see certain attributes, angles and curves. We have bends and twists. Now watch this. If I bend this, you can see that I can bend it and it retains its length. There is one slight little problem. It bends on itself. I wanted to create a spiral. But something many people don't know is that if you untwirl this bend, it allows you to control the amount of this using this spline. So if I take the first knot and bring it down, look at that, I'm actually making a helix, and I can extend this to more than 360 degrees, and the length is preserved, which is perfect for what you're trying to do, and I can control how much it's going to curl. There you go. So let's assume that this is the beginning of what we're trying to do here. The leaf is going to be folded over here. And again, I'm going to show you how you can change the length and make it seem that it's growing and all those interesting things. So to apply this deformation on the leaf, I am going to go and add a spline wrap. Excellent. I'm going to make it a sibling of the leaf, but I'm going to put it after the bend. And you can see that it's pointing in the x-axis. I don't want the x-axis to be the one that's going to be deformed on this spline. I want it to be the z-axis. So go to the spline wrap. Let me close everything here so you see fewer noise on the screen. Set this to Z. There you go. The arrow changes. And now let's put the Noseman over here. Excellent. So now you can see that the leaf is actually folding exactly the way we want it. And by selecting the Noseman and playing around with this bend, if I go here and drag up and down, you can see that I'm creating this unfolding leaf. Isn't that fantastic? So the first part of this deformation has been achieved. So let's assume that this is going to be the final state of our leaf, right? I like that. Let me just make the spline wrap invisible. I'm going to make a null. I'm going to call it leaf 1. And I'm going to make everything a child of that leaf 1. I want everything grouped nicely inside a null. Select the leaf, press Command or Control and drag it to the side so I can have a copy, name it leaf 2, and I'm going to drag it down here, close everything so I can work better. And I'm going to make this a small baby leaf. So let's go and untwirl everything here. Number 1, I want it to bend inside, so I'm going to go here and add a few degrees to the bend. I like that. Number 2, I'm going to change the length. Because the plant is smaller, the leaf is smaller, it's at a young age. And I want to make it thinner. So let's go over here, select this spline, go to points mode, and let's go and select this and drag it in. And you can see, because we're using that spline instance, I can actually model this and make it exactly the way I want it to be. I can even make the stem a bit thinner. I can make this a bit thinner by selecting it and moving it in. But anyhow, you can see that I have full control over the shape of it. And all is fine and dandy at this point. But how do I make this become this using MoGraph? Well, this is the next step. So I'm closing everything. I have these two states. I'm going to create a MoGraph cloner. I'm going to set it to linear and just create one clone. And then I'm going to drag both these guys, put them in here. And the next thing is to select the cloner and make sure the clones mode is not iterate, but is blend mode. So now it's going to blend from one to the other, and because it's just one clone, it's going to stay right here. So how do I control the blending? Well, select the cloner. Let's go and add a plane effector. Let's go and turn off the position. And now the modify clone is what's going to create this transition. And we have a leaf that is growing from this to this and unfurling at the same time. Now here's the great thing about this particular technique. Here we have two states. We have the baby state and we have the grown-up state. How would I go about creating some sort of intermediate state? So not just from this to this, but intermediate state where it's still thin, it unfolds, and then it grows thicker. Well, that's very easy. I'm going to select Leaf 2 and drag with my Command or Control key and make a copy. Now let's go and change this, and I'm going to name this Leaf 1B. And let's go and do something with this. I'm going to untwirl it, and let's say we want this to have a different angle like this, so it's still nice and thin, but it's fairly unfolded here. Excellent. And maybe even change one of these parameters here to make it stretch out, or do this. Maybe that's what we want it to do, so it's going to unfold like that. There you go. So this is the intermediate step I like. I leave it up to you to do the pretty stuff. And now, if I take this and put it in between these two, so we have three siblings, now I'm controlling from the first to the second and then to the third state. And the more time you spend on this, you can make really interesting growths from one state to another. You can make flowers, you can make whatever you want. One final little thing is that the mouse spline always shows where it is. So if you just want to get rid of that because it's annoying you, you just select the mouse splines. And I'm going to go to Object, and in the display mode, I'm just going to say Line. And that's just about it, because otherwise that preview is going to show. Anyway, so we have our leaf, which we can control with the modify clone. And in case you didn't notice, if I set this to 100% and go to the fall off and add a linear field, then I can use that linear field to grow from one state to the other. And this is what we're going to do later on. We don't need the color, but that is the method we are going to use to grow these leaves on the actual stems. If you wanted this leaf to have actual thickness, because now you can see it's extremely flat, it's a single polygon, what you could do is just go in here and grab a cloth surface, put the cloner in the cloth surface. Let's call this leaf thick, press enter, and let's get rid of the subdivisions. We don't want them, and I'm going to add a thickness of 1, and there you have it. So now it's a thick leaf, and that will help you, depending on what renderer you're using, to make something with subsurface scattering and so forth. Although even if it's a single surface, you can use some translucency effects, so that won't be too much of a problem. This increases the geometry to approximately double, but nonetheless it's up to you to choose what you want to do. Let's go now and create the growing stem of this plant. So I'm going to create a new document. Now I'm just going to use a generic spline, and for this I am going to actually use a helix, and I'll tell you how we're going to change this to look the way we want it to. First of all, let's go and align it. And this is the way I want it to be aligned. I can go and change the bottom radius and the top radius, and I'm going to make it taller. So I'm going to use this as the main form of the plant. It's going to go around, but you can use any spline you want. Now you would be tempted to go and do something like make a sweep and add a circle and do all that nice stuff and make the circle smaller. Fantastic. And then go into the sweep, go to the details and scale it down. but I'm not going to do exactly this. And the reason for this is, let's assume I have a certain number of polygons. I'm just going to make this, let's say 2, and I'm going to go to my helix, and I'm going to make this 2 as well. So we have nice equal polygons here. Now, the way to make this grow would be to go to the sweep and use the end growth or the start growth to control it. But number one, we get this problem over here, which I've come across many times, because the scaling doesn't go over the amount of the sweep we have currently, but it's always calculated over the total length of the spline, as you can see, and this is not what I want. The only way to circumvent this, and we are very lucky because this is going to solve another problem for us, and the problem is the number of polygons. You can see that as this is growing, the number of polygons that make up the stem is growing as well. So we have a changing number of polygons, and if we're going to export this as an Alembic file, it may produce some issues when we're trying to motion blur it or do other effects to it. So I'm not going to use this method. What I am going to do is I'm going to put the helix outside, and I'm going to use, once again, the fantastic, the one and only MoSpline. Now, let me put the MoSpline in here, and you will see that the thickness of the sweep is not defined by the circle anymore. It's defined by, go to the Simple tab, by the width. You can see this is what controls the width. And if I go down here, you can see that, number one, this seems to be growing smaller. Well, that is because of the sweep. So right-click here and reset to default. So on its own, the MoSpline has its own controls for the actual pointiness. And if I go to the object and change the length of a spline, again, I'm getting the same problem I had before. But there is a way to solve this. First of all, let's use the helix as the body of this spline. So in the MoSpline, make sure you change the mode to spline. And let's go to the spline tab and grab the helix and put it in the source spline. Now this width is controlling how thick this is going to be, so we can go and set it to whatever thickness we wish. Excellent. So how are we going to go and set it up so we have that nice little tapering at the top? First of all, let's make sure that everything is correct. There you go. And let's make sure the sweep is 100%. I forgot those numbers set. And now for some magic. So select the MoSpline and go and add a plane effector. And you will see that plane effector and all effectors for that matter affect the MoSpline. And the MoSpline gets affected in many different ways. You can see now the plane effector over here. And I do not want to change the position, so I'm going to turn it off. I want to go and change the scale, set it to a uniform scale, and I'm going to go to -1. And just so that you can see what happens, I can control the scaling of this spline, which in turn controls the thickness of our stem. So -1 means there's nothing here. So if I go and render this, you'll see we can't see anything. But if I go to this plane effector, and let's name it plane scale stem, and I'm going to go to the fall off and add a linear field and set it to +y, and you can see now the linear field controls the thickness of my stem. So I can control how fast it's going to grow by making it shorter and by animating its position. Now the good thing about this is that although it may seem that the number of polygons is changing, that actually is not the case. Here we have an infinitely thin amount of geometry, and although it doesn't render, it already exists, and because it exists, the actual indices of these points, something we'll come back to a bit later, they're always constant, and that is fantastic because it gives us a very predictable way of growing something without adding geometry to it. So this is the way we're going to animate this. So I'm going to leave this over here. I'm not going to animate anything quite yet. The question now becomes, okay, we have this, I can go and control the overall thickness. So go here, the overall thickness is this. I can control how it's going to taper by controlling this linear field and the amount of scaling. I can even go to this linear field, to the remapping tab, and change the contour not to a linear but to a curve, which will sort of ease it in and ease it out, and it's going to make it ever so slightly smoother. So I'm okay with this. What else can I do? Well, first of all, if you go to the mouse spline and untwirl this, you can control the final shape and how it's going to be scaled after the fact, because now with the linear field, if everything is like default, you will get a stem which is the same thickness except for the top part, which is growing. If you want the overall shape to be tapered from the bottom all the way to the top, just go here and play around with this little slope, and this will allow you to create some kinks. If you press Command or Control, you can add a point, and you can do this, so your plant becomes a bit more organic. Talking about organic, I have this great idea. I'm going to take my growing stem, and I want to add some bumpiness to it. I want to add something which will make it even more organic. So we're going to put organic on top of the organic. Now let's do that using a displace deformer. Now I'm going to first go and make a null, and let's call this, I'm going to copy this. So double click, Command C, Command V, all. And I'm going to put the displacer in here, bring this down here, and put the growing stem underneath. Fantastic. Now let me show you something. I'm going to pull the linear field down here, so we have half the plant that hasn't grown yet. And I'm going to go to the displacer, go to the shading, and I'm going to add a noise. Fantastic. Now you can see we get this jagged little thingy-madoodle, and if I render this in my viewport, you will see that we're getting these little things, disconnected stuff. We can see the geometries intersecting, and that is because, as I told you, the geometry exists, and if we start moving it around, it won't be that infinitely small geometry. So how do we go about fixing this? Well, it's not that difficult, but you need to pay attention. So go to the displacer, go to the fall off tab, and number one, use the same linear field, but something odd is going to happen. This is going to make this part not receive the actual displacement, but the top part, which was problematic, is, so we still have these little rogue pieces and all this disconnected geometry. So we need to invert the effect. So let's go to the displacer. We're already here in the fall off tab, and go here and add an invert. It's down here, and you select it, and it will invert that particular linear field. And this does not interfere with the placement of the linear field inside the fall off of the plane effector. And that's because it's used in a different context, and when I add something to each list, it only affects that list. So now I can go to the displacer here, and I can change the noise any way I want. Go to shading, go and select something like a Luca noise, and of course I can select the displacer and go up to the object and say I want this to be ever so slightly less, and maybe go here and select the noise and make it a bit bigger, and there you have it. So now I've added more organicness over the organicness, and this is fantastic, and everything works absolutely fine because no deformation occurs above the linear field from this point onwards. And if you render this, you'll see we have no artifacts or anything else, and this looks really nice. It looks like a plant. With enough imagination, it looks like anything. The next step is to go and attach some clones to certain parts of the plant so they can be stable and grow from that particular point. So first, let's clean this up a bit. The viewport, I'm going to hide the linear field, and I'm going to go to the mouse spline and go to the object and display mode, line, and everything now is much cleaner. Excellent. So what are the ways we can attach things to this? Now let's go and create a cloner, and I'm going to bring it down here. And of course I want to set it to object mode because I'm going to attach some clones on an object. Now for the next part, I'm just going to take a disk. I'm going to make it smaller over here, so I'm going to drag this little dot, and I'm going to make a null as well. And what I want to do is go here and move the disk so that its side is where the null is, and I'm going to call this mock leaf. So nothing really, just a little prop we can go and attach. Now one thing I did, which is pretty wrong, is I want this to be on the z-axis so that it complies with the leaf we made earlier. So just set this to 0 and this to 20. I think that is fine. So here's my mock leaf, and if I rotate it, it rotates from the null. Excellent. Now let's put this mock leaf in the cloner, and I want the cloner to reference as an object the actual growing stem. So I'm going to put this over here, and you can see that it's sort of growing everywhere. And let's see what happens when I grow this. When I move upwards, you can see that we get these jitters. Look at that. And the reason is that the cloner is trying to grow things on the surface. Now, the only points that happen to be fixed in space are the vertices. So although, again, I have to repeat this, although it doesn't appear to have vertices here, it does, but they are infinitely thin, not the vertices, but the geometry itself. But as far as everything else, those are the ones that keep moving when it grows and so forth. So I need to find a way to attach this to vertices. Now, there seems to be an issue because this is a generator, and I can't make vertex selections, point selections, so to speak. So what can I do? Well, let's try selecting the cloner. First of all, I'm going to say distribution, and we're going to put it to vertex. Now it's going to take a few seconds because there are quite a few of these little buggers over here, and you can see they grow all the way to the top because, as I said earlier, they already exist. So what can I do in this particular case? Well, I'm going to go and create a plane effector. I'm going to go to the parameters and turn off everything, but I'm going to turn on the visibility. Now nothing's going to happen quite yet. But if I go to the fall off and I want to define clones to be on particular indices, so I'm going to go and add a formula field. Now don't be afraid, we're not going to use anything as complex as this. I'm going to just select everything and delete it, and I'm going to bring this up so you can see a couple of things. If you go here to the variables, there's a very important variable that is called ID, and that's a component index. Now we know that MoGraph clones have their own indices. What you may not know is that these indices, when we're applying cloners with objects, when we're in object mode, these indices come, well, if you go to transform, you'll see the indices right here. These indices are actually transferred from the point indices of the underlying geometry. So let's go back to that plane. I'm going to call this plane hide leaves. Good. And in the formula field, I'm going to go to the field. I'm going to type ID equals, and I want to go and just put a random ID. I'm going to set one to 150. And you can see here we have a leaf growing on point 150. And let's go and see how this reacts when I move the linear field. You can see it moves with the geometry. Now, when the geometry doesn't exist, then it sort of moves to where that invisible geometry could be, but we're going to take care of this in a second. So now I'm going to go and eyeball it. I'm going to change this number to, let's say, 250. Okay, so let's say the first leaf is going to be at 350, I would say. There you go. Now I'm going to go and add more of these leaves up here. So go back here, and we have formula field, the first one. Then don't make a copy of this. Go and add another one. I'm going to copy this so I don't have to type things. So add another formula. And I'm going to go here and paste. And let's put this at 650. So now we have another one. You don't need to do anything else as long as it's set to max. Now that's 650, copy it, go and add another formula, paste it here, and let's set this to 590. Good. If it's too close, just change the number. Let's go 790. There you go. And if you want to put these on predefined points, there is a little trick you can do, but you need to make a list. Go select the growing stem and make it as tall as you want it to be by moving the linear field. Let's say this is the final state. It won't grow any taller. Now I'm going to go here and right click and say current state to object. And this is going to create some geometry. Cut it from here, go to a new document, paste it in here, and if you go and set this to point mode and you want to see which point is which number, all you have to do is go to the structure manager over here and go and start selecting points. And what you will see is when you select this point over here, and you can go and go to jump next selection, and you'll find 0.644, and you can use pencil and paper and write down 644. Let's go and find another one. I'm going to go around here and select this one, and let's go back to the view, and let's go and find the next one. So that is the N, and oh, it's a previous one. So let's go to last selection, and this is 412. 412. Let's go up here and select this point, and let's go Shift N, and again next selection. We're going to go back and forth. 871, and this way you can make a list of points. When you're done, you can close this document and not save it, and you can go and start adding these numbers to whatever you have. Don't forget to change back to your attributes here. And I'm going to use these numbers. I'm going to go and copy this and say, let's create a new formula field, and let's paste this here and change the number to 871. Excellent. And let's make another one and paste it here and change this to 644. This may overlap with something else, does it? No. And you can actually see the numbers here. That's the interesting part. And let's do the last one, the 412. Click here and double click, paste, and do 412. Enter. And yeah, that's the way you go up the points and you add more and more leaves. So you can see the number is ascending, so it's going from lower numbers to higher numbers. So you can add a few which are in the 1,000 range. So let's put 1,200. There you go. And where is that? Or 1,200. We need to go even higher. So add one more, and let's set this to 2,000, and so forth and so on. And yeah, just take your time and add as many as you want. Excellent. So let's deal with that vanishing thing we had the problem with, where they don't vanish. What you can do is make sure that the cloner is selected, and we're going to go and create a plane effector, which is going to be called plane scale leaves. Fantastic. Or is it leaves? Anyway, leaves. And I'm going to go and change this from position. Just select the parameter, go to scale, and I'm going to go and make a uniform scale to -1. And I can use the same linear field I use to create the growth. But sometimes you do not want the changes we are generating using this field to be exactly the same as the ones we are going to use for scaling the leaves. So what I like to do is go to the fall off. I'm going to go and create another linear field and set this to -y, which you can see now I'm going to grow them. And what I'm going to do is make this smaller and make it a child of this. I'm going to call this linear field leaves scale. Fantastic. So now when I move this, the other one moves with it. And you can see that I can choose exactly where to place it. So let me make this visible. You can see the difference between where one is and the other. And I can say, you know something, I'm going to raise this a bit. And I want these leaves to start growing just after after the first one has grown the stem. There you go. And you can control at which point this is going to happen by just moving this up or down. So that's a way you can use to just hide these while they are growing. I'm happy with the progress I've managed to make up to this point. And now is the time to actually bring in my growing leaves and replace the ones I used here as proxies. So let's go to the other document over here, and what I'm going to do is take these three, 1, 2, and 3, drag them out, and I want to scale them down, or I can do that when I get to the other document. So let me just copy them, Command C or Control C. Let's go back to the other document, and I'm going to paste them here, get rid of the mock leaf, select all three, put them as children, and they are too big, so just use your model tool and your scaling and just make everything as small as you want it to be. Now let me switch over here so we can see these a bit better. So let's see what happens right now. I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it up and down, and you can see that they just scale up, but there is nothing that changes their shape at all. Excellent. So let's go to the cloner. Let's set it up so that now it's in blend mode. Fantastic. And let's go and add a plane effector. So MoGraph, plane effector, plane blend leaves. Excellent. And I'm going to go to the parameters, turn off the position, and turn on the modify clone. Excellent. And let's go to the fall off, add our own linear field here and put it on +y. And if I move this up and down, you'll see them growing. Excellent. I'm going to make it slightly shorter. I'm going to make this one a child of that one as well. Linear field, unfurl leaves. And if we go here now and start moving this, you will see that we get the effect of everything. Now, there's too much to see here, so let's simplify this a bit, and let's go a bit closer and see what happens. You can see that they grow, and I think they are too small, but nonetheless, they do that sort of interesting thing. Maybe I need to take my unfurl leaves and make it shorter so that it affects this a bit better. You can see what's happening here. So there you go. I'm going to move it to the point where it seems to be better. And now as our plant is growing, the leaves are going to start growing as well. But there you go. We have the leaves growing now all the way until they're outside. Now, don't forget that if you want to control where they are facing, you can either go to the cloner, transformations, and start moving certain rotations around. You can turn them any way you want as a group, and you can also add some randomness to this by going to the cloner and saying, I want some randomness in the rotation, for example. So we can go to the rotation and add some randomness to their rotation so that they look a bit more natural. I'm sure someone is asking the following question right now. What happens if we don't want one type of leaf, we want more types of leaf? How do we mix the other leaves in this cloner? Well, you don't. You just make a copy of this particular cloner, and let's say cloner leaves 01. You make a copy of this, and you attach that whatever other type of leaf you want to attach to it, and make sure that the growth, or the opposite, the hiding of leaves, has its own number so they can grow in different places. And that's how you're going to go and do that. For each type of leaf or flower or something like that, you're going to use a different cloner, but that shares most of the settings. So for example, you need to make sure that all the same effectors are applied, of course providing that everything grows in the same rate and so forth. But this doesn't stop you from combining the same technique multiple times and creating something extremely complex. Now let's close this off. I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to go here first of all and turn off the indices. And I like to show you something which I find fascinating. Now, I'm not going to finalize this. I'm just going to show you a technique where I can save all this growth as an alembic and then use that alembic so that I grow smaller branches on my main branch. And let me show you what I mean. So let's go and create an animation where frame 0, we're going to be down here. And I'm going to select this and go and set a Y value. Let's go all the way up to 90 and let's grow this up to this point. Good. Let's assume that this is what I like. And now we have this beautiful animation playing and the leaves are unfurling and growing. Great. Now I'm going to go and save this as an alembic file. Now we have two parts. We have the growing stem and we have the clone leaves, and I can do this in two parts. I can save each one as an alembic. Now if you want this to be one piece of geometry, make sure you select this and you put it under a connect object. So I'm going to put this here. I'm going to call this growing stem. I need to make sure, and this is imperative, that the weld points is off. Otherwise, it's going to create an alembic with a variable number of points. Now you can put this here. And now I'm going to create one more of those. I'm going to go and create another connect. I'm going to call this cloner leaves. Excellent. Again, I'm going to get rid of the weld and I'm going to put this over here. So what I can do now is select this and right click and say bake as alembic. Now it will create an alembic folder and it will use the name of this to save the alembic file. And as you can see, it doesn't take too long, especially for 90 frames. Excellent. It's just getting there. Fantastic. If you take a look here on the left, you'll see that the A, which is the A from alembic, is red. When it's red, it means that somewhere along the way, the point count of this object changed. Now, in this particular case, if you're just doing a simple model or animation, it doesn't really make a huge difference. But if you're going to render this and use motion blur or something like that, you may run into trouble. The reason this happened is the following. Let me delete this and let me untwirl this. Now, in the sweep, you will see that we have caps enabled. And because these caps are n-gons, as you can see down here, the n-gons cannot be exported in an alembic file as n-gons themselves. So it subdivides those n-gons into triangles and quads. But because this is an animated mesh, those points may change. So by removing the start and end cap, I'm going to go back to the growing stem and re-export the alembic. Now, as you can see, the alembic has a green A, which means that the number of points is consistent. So now let's select this one and right-click and bake as alembic. Now that I have these two alembic files, let me show you a nice little trick you can do. I'm going to bring them down here, and I'm going to remove the two connect objects because I'm not going to use them. So just take them out of the hierarchy and remove them. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this off. So first of all, I want you to see that the animation exists in alembic form. And it's just a couple of files, one with the leaves and one with the stem. So what I'm going to do is put my playhead over here, turn around, and I'm going to go and create a null and put it approximately at the center, at the origin of where the alembic stem grows. Let me bring it down here and call it alemb, and I'm going to take these two and put them as children. Excellent. So this is alemb 1. Now the next thing I'm going to do is make a copy of this, and what I want to do here is first of all I'm going to move the playhead. We have these two, and what I'm going to do is go and change for both of these the animation offset. So I'm going to select them both and go and what I'm going to do is go down a few frames. There you go. So I'm going to go to frame 48 and here must be at 0. Good. So we have these two versions with the only parameter that's different is the offset. Now if I go to the cloner leaves and delete the leaves, I'm going to turn it on again and drag these two as children of that. And let's see what's going on here. You can see it's a bit of a mess, but if I drag this back, and I'm going to fix these little offsets here, these little problematic offsets, but you can see now that while this is playing, each one is growing and the leaves are growing as well. So let's go and fix that little issue with these two. So I'm going to just go here, and you can see that this was offset. So you can see that's where one of the two nulls is, and I need to move this one. So go to the axes tool, and I'm going to move it here. I don't know why it moved, but that's irrelevant currently. So now they should be nice and fixed. And to fix this mess, just go to the cloner, go to the scale, click on the S so you can select all three of these, and press Command or Control and click and drag here and just make these smaller so that they look like little branches, little stems. If I now rewind, what you will see, let me frame this nicely, is that now each and every one of those is going to grow, and when it grows, the leaves are going to grow as well. And this method basically allows you, every time you bake a version, because let's say we bake a version of all this now as an alembic, then I can use that again by just changing the offset of the animation on one of the two groups, and I can create something which is even more complex. And you can make a few different versions with different main stems, with a different number of leaves, and just by doing the same process I did 2 or 3 times, you can create a huge variety of different branches growing, and you can even make trees and stuff like that. But nonetheless, this is the method. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, so follow, subscribe, and search for me on Google and all that, and let's get some questions going.